All right, let's get right into it. A massive constitutional showdown has just exploded, pitting the Supreme Court directly against the president over his economic authority. This whole thing raises some really fundamental questions about the limits of power. So, we're going to break down how we got here, what this decision really means, and why it matters so much. So here's the headline. In a landmark 6-3 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has just struck down the president's Liberation Day tariffs. They ruled them unconstitutional. This is a huge deal. It completely dismantles a cornerstone of the administration's entire economic policy and, you can bet, sets the stage for a major conflict. So you're probably asking, how could the president just impose massive tariffs like this without getting a clear green light from Congress? Well, the answer lies in a pretty clever and controversial use of emergency powers, all stemming from one single law that was interpreted in a very, very expansive way. The legal key that unlocked all of this was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. You'll hear it called IEEPA. It's a 1997 law, and it's designed to give the president power to respond to, and I'm quoting here, an unusual and extraordinary threat from another country. Historically, though, this was used for things like sanctions against rogue nations, not for putting broad taxes on goods that you and I buy every day. So what exactly qualified as this unusual and extraordinary threat? Well, the administration declared two separate national emergencies to trigger the EPA. First, the influx of illegal drugs, and second, something much more economic, the country's large and persistent trade deficits. And if you want a window into the mindset behind all this, look no further than this quote from the president himself. "I have the right to do anything I want to do. I'm the president of the United States." It really suggests a belief that the office itself provides almost unlimited power to act alone, especially in what's perceived as a crisis. And it wasn't just what was declared an emergency, but how often. I mean, look at this. In just 13 months, this administration declared 10 emergencies. To put that in perspective, the historical average for a president's entire 4-year term is around 7. So this tool was being used a lot. Okay, so this whole legal and constitutional debate had very real-world consequences. Let's shift gears and unpack the actual economic impact of this policy, on businesses and on American families. The pitch for these tariffs was pretty straightforward. We were told foreign countries would pay, that manufacturing jobs would come flooding back, and that the economy would boom. But when you look at the data, economic analyses tell a really different story. It was U.S. consumers who paid the costs, manufacturing actually lost jobs, and overall economic growth slowed down. And this wasn't just some abstract economic theory. It hit people right in the wallet. A Joint Economic Committee analysis estimated that this policy acted like a direct tax, costing the average American household about $1,700 in a single year. That's real money. On top of the cost, this created an incredibly chaotic and unstable environment for businesses. The tariff rates, especially on Chinese goods, were all over the place. I mean, imagine trying to plan your business when a 10% tariff might double next month. In one crazy instance, the rate jumped from 34% to 84% and then got jacked up to 125% the very next day. It made long-term planning basically impossible. So, as you can imagine, after the Supreme Court dropped its bombshell decision, the reaction from the White House was, well, it was immediate and it was not subtle. The president went on the attack. In a 45-minute public response, he aimed his fire directly at the Supreme Court itself. He called the justices who voted against him, including his own appointees, fools and lapdogs. He even accused the entire court of being unpatriotic and disloyal, and claimed they were swayed by foreign interests. And then came this incredible bit of spin. The president actually framed the court's decision against him as a victory. He claimed that the ruling, despite what it said, somehow made his authority to impose tariffs more powerful and more crystal clear, and he vowed he was going to use that power right away. And he wasn't kidding. The administration immediately announced a new plan to get around Congress. Again. The new proposal? A 10% global tariff, this time using a different law that lets it happen for 150 days. And when asked if he'd work with Congress this time, the president's response was simple. I don't have to. This move had economists like Justin Wolfers just scratching their heads. He asked, what's the point? A temporary 150-day tariff isn't going to convince any company to build a new factory or completely change its supply chain. His conclusion? It's not a real economic strategy. It's just a short-term tax on Americans, plain and simple. The pushback also started coming from the states. In a pretty bold move, the governor of Illinois literally sent an invoice to the White House for over $8.6 billion. He was demanding repayment for what he called costs that were illegally passed on to the people of his state.
Okay, so let's pull the camera back and look at the really big picture here, because this whole mess goes way beyond just economics. It really gets to the heart of our system of government, the separation of powers and the rule of law itself.
And some analysts are framing this entire tariff saga in really stark terms. Simon Rosenberg called it, quote, arguably both the most reckless act and the greatest abuse of power by a president in American history. He wasn't mincing words at all.
This whole strategy, using emergencies to bypass the normal system, actually aligns with a controversial political theory from a philosopher named Carl Schmitt. The basic idea is that true power doesn't come from laws or constitutions, but from the leader who can declare an emergency and then operate outside of those rules to get things done.
But this also led to some sharp criticism of the judicial process itself. As commentator Josh Marshall pointed out, these tariffs were in place for nearly a full year before they were finally struck down. And he raises a fantastic point. If the system allows for what he calls massive dictator mulligans, basically long periods of unconstitutional action with no quick fix, is the system really working? And, the court's ruling leaves a huge practical question just hanging in the air. What happens to the billions of dollars that were collected while this unconstitutional tariff system was in place? Are the businesses and consumers who paid all that money going to get a refund? Right now, nobody seems to have an answer. When you boil it all down, this whole episode shines a massive spotlight on a deep tension in our system of government. Yes, emergency powers exist for a reason, for genuine crises, but this case shows just how easily they can be used to completely sidestep Congress and the normal way of doing things. It leaves us with a really critical question. If a president can just declare any problem an emergency, where do you draw the line? What, if anything, is truly beyond their power?